Hello everyone, welcome to the WASABI Aquarium channel. In this video, I'll be teaching you how to attach and grow Anubias in a planted aquarium. Here in my hands is the plant Anubias nana, and it is probably the most commonly found and grown Anubias in the hobby. I am guessing that for many of you, this plant here was in your first ever planted aquarium. This is probably due to a number of different reasons, but the main one I'm guessing is probably because it was recommended to you by your local aquarium shop. The conversation probably started with you asking what plants are easy to keep, and one of the answers you got from the shop staff was most likely an Anubias plant. So why is Anubias such a commonly recommended plant in the hobby? I would say that it's not necessarily that the plant is easy to grow, but rather that Anubias in general are extremely tough plants. In terms of its preference, it doesn't need bright light, it doesn't need CO2, and your pH can be anywhere from low to high. Because of its tolerance towards almost any condition, it is an easy plant to keep. However, the longer that you've been in this hobby, the more you will understand to not underestimate Anubias. The challenge with Anubias is to have it thrive and grow perfectly. For many experienced aquarists, myself included, Anubias is in our eyes one of the more difficult plants that you can grow. So why is that? Well, the main reason comes down to growth speed. Anubias is well known for growing very slow in comparison to other plants like stem plants. In the case of stem plants, as long as you have most of the requirements met, it will constantly grow at a fast pace. Because of how fast stem plants grow, you don't run into many issues with algae killing the plant. That's why it's easy to keep background plants looking beautiful. In comparison, for plants like Anubias who prefer darker conditions, almost all of them grow very slow, which means that they are more likely to be covered in algae. When your water parameters aren't perfect, or when you have excess nutrient levels, the first plant to start being attacked by algae is probably Anubias. You start with this beautiful dark green leaf plant, and then it starts to grow blackbeard algae or hair algae starts to envelop it. For these reasons, Anubias is an easy plant to start with, but is very difficult to master. Another challenge with Anubias from the perspective of an expert is that it can be hard to find a good place for it to grow in a nature aquarium. In a nature aquarium or other types of proper planted aquariums, one of your goals is to make the layout look visually stunning. With Anubias, they have a sort of unique waxy look to them, and their leaves are very tough. Due to this characteristic, it is difficult to just place it randomly because your eyes will naturally gravitate towards it. This leads to an overall lack of visual balance because your eyes go to the Anubias first if you don't plan for it. So it can be quite the challenge to find a perfect spot to grow Anubias, because if you make a mistake, it will make your layout not look as nice. Aquarium size also plays a role. For example, you probably don't want to put this large piece of Anubias nana in a 30 cm cube aquarium, as it will take up too much space. This combination of Anubias being challenging to use in terms of layout design, and also difficulty in growing it perfectly, makes it a tough plant to use. But later in the video, I will show you the methods you can use in order to avoid these many challenges, so please look forward to that. Okay, so here's that pot of Anubias nana again, and I'll be showing you how to prepare it for planting, and then actually planting it. At many aquarium shops, it is probably most common to see this plant being sold as a potted plant. This information is for Japan specifically, but many of the plants that get imported here have a likely chance of having some pesticides or some other unwanted chemicals on it. So in these cases, I recommend soaking the plant in water and then adding some pesticide neutralizer to make sure that it will be safe for your aquarium. Otherwise, rinsing off the plant in water can help get rid of unwanted pests like snails, so I would recommend doing that as well. Alright, with that out of the way, let's move on to step 1. Step 1 is removing the plant from the pot. And then for potted plants, they are commonly grown in this medium called rock wool. So the next step is to remove as much of the rock wool as we can. It can be a bit difficult, as well as being time consuming, so it is annoying to do. In this step, don't worry about whether you pull or tear off some of the roots. These roots that you see right now are basically useless once they are in the aquarium. The roots that start to grow after being in the aquarium are the truly important roots. So again, if some of these roots tear at this step, then don't worry about it. Okay, so most of the big chunks have been pulled off. If you are a perfectionist and you want to get off every last piece of rock wool, then I recommend using a small hand-sized pair of tweezers to get in between the roots and start pulling off the small bits of rock wool. The tweezers, or pincets as they're called in Japan, that I'm using today is the ADA Pro Pincet, it's the small size. This particular size is very useful in removing rock wool. When you are planting, you'll probably want to use the large or extra large size, but when you are removing rock wool, this S-size pincet becomes a blessing. I would even say that it would be worth having a pair of this S-size pincet just for this task. With your fingers, it would be impossible to get into the really deep grooves in the roots where a lot of the rock wool would be stuck, so having a set of these really helps. After you remove most of the rock wool, just rinse the plant off thoroughly, and then you're done. With rock wool, you want to avoid putting this stuff in your aquarium if you can help it. In the case of Aquarius in Japan, we have to worry about any pesticides that are absorbed into the rock wool, and to be honest, the stuff just looks bad, so I always remove as much as I can. Alright, I have removed the rock wool from the roots and rinsed the plant off very thoroughly. Now, to get the plant ready for attachment, we need to do something about these roots. Keeping the roots isn't harmful or anything, but it isn't beneficial either. These roots are kind of just there in the aquarium, and they also get in the way when you go to planting. So I recommend cutting these roots off, as they're not really beneficial to keep around anyways. With that said, in some past IAPLC contest entries, there have been some very high-ranking layouts that have used Anubias roots in a very dynamic and cool way. For example, one I remember is someone planted some Anubias on a really high piece of driftwood and let the roots grow down into a sort of viney look. There are some interesting ways of using Anubias in a layout, so be creative. And with that, the roots have been trimmed. Next, we move on to attaching the Anubias to some hardscape. There are two main ways of doing this. One is to attach the Anubias directly onto your main hardscape pieces in your layout. For example, you'll see people attach Anubias to their main pieces of driftwood, their stones, or any other main piece of hardscape. The other method, which is what I will be showing you for this video, is to attach it to a small piece of rock and then place that in your layout. I will admit that attaching the Anubias directly onto your main pieces of hardscape gives off a more natural appearance. But the downside to that is once you attach it, you can't really adjust it. That's where this other method comes in. By attaching the Anubias to a small piece of stone, you are able to not only pick wherever you want to put it, but also move it and adjust the plant as needed. Which method you pick is up to you, as they both have a place and time to be used. As an example, if you are starting a new layout, attaching the Anubias to your main hardscape from the start can take it from pretty good to excellent. So in that case, I might go for the direct attachment. Another example is if later on there's a spot in your layout where you want some sort of attaching type plant, then it becomes very difficult to add it later on. That's when attaching the Anubias to a small piece of stone becomes ideal, as you can just place it into that spot that you would have otherwise struggled to attach it to. In terms of what stone to pick to attach the Anubias, the short answer is any stone works. But I find that using something like lava rock, which is very porous and rough, makes it much easier to attach the plant and have it root faster. When you try to do this with smoother surface stones, it does take a lot longer for the plant to properly attach itself, and there's a higher chance of you accidentally pulling the Anubias off. So that's why I recommend that you use something like lava rock for this scenario. Now, this particular piece of Anubias is very interesting and nice looking, so I will not adjust it in any way. But if you want to divide the plant into multiple pieces, then you can pretty easily snap the plant off at the base here. Again, for this specific plant, I won't be doing that, but you can either snap pieces off with your hands, or take some scissors and cut it here at the base. Now let's get to attaching. For this video, I'll be using ADA's Wood Tight. The nice thing about this product is that it has this dark brown color, which lets it blend into both the driftwood and stones quite well. If you are unable to get your hands on this product, then an alternative you can use would be fishing line, or if you don't have any, then some cotton string would work as well. Here are some tips on attaching Anubias. First, get a good idea of how you want the piece to look. You can call this a test fit, so to speak. So in this case, something like this would look good, yeah. For Anubias specifically, their roots are very strong once they are established. Because of that, you don't need to go too strong on the attachment. As long as the base of the plant and the stone are together, then you're good to go. Now, I'll pass a piece of wood tight through the cracks in between the leaves like so. It doesn't really matter where you pick, so just find a spot that works for you. Then you pass it all the way through and tie it at the bottom part of the stone. If it was a bit too long, then cut off any extra and tie it up. Like I mentioned earlier, you don't need to do it super tight. Your goal is to have it strong enough for the plant to stay in place. For this piece of Anubias, I'll attach it in two different areas. I don't really have to do that, but it doesn't hurt to do either. And okay, so that was the first attachment point done. Now I'll tie down the opposite side of where I attached the Anubias originally. I'm repeating myself, but this isn't necessary at all in this case. But if you want to be cautious, then it never hurts to do. And if you are in a rush, then just tying it down in one point is also okay. With most of your quote-unquote attaching type plants, such as Anubias, Microsorums, aka Java ferns, Bulbitis, etc., it can be a challenge to tie them down with a string, which is why I use and recommend something like the ADA Wood Tight, where it has a bendable wire in it that makes tying these plants down a breeze. And just like that, my Anubias is tied down in two different spots. And here's what the bottom of the stone looks like. Again, if there's some extra left over, please cut it off to avoid any chance of fish getting stabbed by the wire inside. Now there's another quick tip that I would like to teach you regarding the visibility of the wood type. As you can see from this angle here, the wood type is in plain sight, and it just doesn't look that good, especially when you put it into your aquarium. So what I recommend you do is to take some moss, which I'll be using Java moss for this, and place it over the exposed pieces of the wood type. Any moss will work for this, so if you don't have Java moss, then use Christmas moss, or whatever you can get your hands on. After you have covered up the wood type with some moss, you then will want to wrap the moss with some sort of string, and then those eyesore pieces of wood type are now gone. By doing this step, you get a more natural appearance overall, so if the exposed wood type is bothering you, then please try this method out. And that wraps up the attaching section of the video. Next, let's talk about finding the best areas to place Anubias. If you get a moment to, take a look at this layout and think to yourself where you would put that piece of Anubias we were just working with. For this topic, I'll be using my 180cm display aquarium as an example. The key thing I want to teach you is that even in an aquarium this size, proper placement of an Anubias plant can make or break the layout. Here I have that Anubias nana that we attached earlier, and let's say I place it right here in the middle or somewhere up here. What happens if I do that is the balance between the foreground section and the background plants become broken. For this layout, I'm using a lot of thin-leafed background plants, and have it so that the farther from the center you go, the larger the plant leaves get. This is visible through my use of bulbitis and Hygrophila polysperma towards the edge of the layout. So with that in mind, if I take a large leafed plant like this Anubias and place it in the middle with all the thinner leaf plants, then the layout will look off. In general, the correct placement will be somewhere towards the edge of the layout. This will be the case regardless of whether it's a 180cm aquarium, a 60cm aquarium, or a 45cm aquarium. Another point is to use this sort of larger waxy leaf plants on both sides of the aquarium if you are going to use them. And when you do use them, place them towards the front of the layout and not the back. This will create a stronger sense of depth, which leads to a more dynamic layout. With this in mind, I'll be placing this piece of Anubias here, towards this right edge. I also have a convenient spot to place this Anubias due to my use of Unzan stone, which has holes carved out for easy planting. This Anubias will go directly below my bulbitis, here in the shadows. Now, I'll place my Anubias here and see how it looks. Alright, it's set. So because of how big this aquarium is, I can't fit the whole aquarium in frame. I bring it up because it's hard to see through video on how the layout looks in terms of balance. There's also the fact that I'm staring at it directly, but even in this size aquarium, I think these leaves are just a tad too large. I do feel that it sticks out ever so slightly, so what I will do is adjust the size until it matches the layout. What I mean by this is I will cut off the leaves I find too large, and over time, if done consistently, the leaves on the plant will stay smaller altogether. Even in the same clump of Anubias, you'll have some very large leaves and some small. In cases where the Anubias just sticks out like a sore thumb, I recommend you go through and cut off the extra large leaves like so. When you do cut these larger leaves off, it almost sends a message to the plant, telling it not to grow as big. So again, if some leaves are just sticking out too much, just cut it off from the beginning. When it comes to trimming plants, I know the thought of stem plants come to mind first. But with these sorts of shade-loving plants, putting effort into attention to detail will make a huge difference in the outcome of the layout. This is true not only of Anubias, but of Bulbitis and of other similar plants as well. By paying attention to these what seem to be small details, your layout will look more homogenized and natural, where everything blends in without anything looking out of place. In terms of actually caring for the plant, Anubias in general seems to be one of the first plants to get attacked by algae. So by placing the plant at the edge of the aquarium in the shade, the plant can escape whatever strong lighting you are using. If you place an Anubias plant in an area where it gets covered in light, you will see these spots of algae start growing on the leaves, which doesn't look very pretty. If you don't have a spot that works at the edge of the aquarium, then that's okay. You can instead place it somewhere that will be shaded. For example, below an overhang is a good shady spot in general. Another shady area that can work would be below a large plant, like this Bulbitis here. By placing the Anubias in these shaded areas, you will not only avoid a lot of algae, but you will also be able to grow that Anubias out a lot healthier. And because Anubias is an algae magnet, make sure you have a bunch of Amana shrimp in your aquarium. Or really, any combination of Amana shrimp, Otocinclus, and Siamese algae eaters will eat the algae off the leaves of the Anubias, so make sure you have plenty of these algae eaters. And if you are struggling with algae on your Anubias, even though you have enough algae eaters, then it's most likely time to up your water change schedule. If your aquarium is well maintained, then you won't grow algae on your Anubias. Along those lines, the way you tell a good aquarist from a great aquarist is by looking at their Anubias. The aquarists that have perfect looking Anubias with basically zero algae spots on it are the ones that are maintaining their layout perfectly. But there is also a chance that the layout is malnourished, so be careful of that. To sum it up, if the Anubias has zero algae on it, the red plants are properly red, and the green plants are properly green, then that's the ideal layout. That is the goal of anyone who has a planted aquarium. When you get a chance, please try and play around with both light-loving plants and dark-loving plants like this Anubias here to make the best layout you can. Okay, so because I was using this 180 centimeter aquarium as my example, I was able to get away with using a larger type of Anubias, like an Anubias nana. But if my example aquarium was, let's say, 60 centimeters or smaller, then it is extremely difficult to make a larger type of Anubias grow small enough to fit in something 60 centimeters or smaller. So in those cases, I recommend using this plant here, called Anubias nana petite. When comparing the regular Anubias nana to the petite variety, you can see how much bigger the normal one is compared to the petite. Anubias nana petite is also very easy to use even in a large aquarium like this one here. For example, I can just place this here by the base of the stones and it will match well. Compared to the larger types of Anubias, the petite variety is way easier to use by a massive margin. Picking the right species or variety of Anubias to match the size of your aquarium is another effective way of making your layout look better. There are a ton of different varieties of Anubias out there, so when you have some time, please research what sorts of Anubias are out there. It is very interesting to see the number of varieties and species commonly available, so please check it out. So, how's the video? To sum it all up, I started this video by teaching you how to attach an Anubias plant to a piece of stone, showed you the tips and tricks of placing it, and also some care advice on keeping your Anubias plant happy and growing. With Anubias, if you can make it blend into your layout really nicely, then your layout will look that much better. This is reliant on you choosing the right variety, as there are many, and then finding the most balanced spots to place it that will not make it a challenge for the plant to grow. If you go for only brighter colored plants in your layout, The end result will look too unnatural and you won't get that feeling of being immersed in nature. By not having that sort of quote-unquote aged look to it, the potential of your layout will go down dramatically. Even though these plants like Anubias at first glance look very boring and uninteresting, it is important to have, especially to get both the light areas and dark areas of the aquarium planted. By utilizing Anubias and other similar plants effectively, you will have a more dynamic looking layout due to having both light and dark plants, as well as getting that aged appearance nature has. I would say that you can boil this all down to learn how to use Anubias effectively and your layout will look dramatically better. If this video has helped you out in any way, then please leave a like on the video and subscribe to the WASABI Aquarium channel for more planted aquarium content. Before I end the video, a quick disclaimer. Unfortunately, due to running both my shop and this YouTube channel on my own, I will not be able to answer your questions in the comment section below. However, if there's a question that gets asked repeatedly, then I will try to answer it in its own Q&A style video, so please don't feel discouraged from asking questions.